So right off the bat, I noticed in your trivia that it mentions that you turned down writing for Blood and Honey, due to
Yeah.
scheduling. So can you walk me through that a bit, and talk a bit about like what you did instead? And then also, I know that you collaborate with that team quite a bit. Um, is there any word, or have you maybe thrown your hat in that ring of this new horror fairy tale multiverse that's kind of coming about?
I've not heard too much about it. I mean, so it was probably about a year, just over a year ago, that um, they asked me to do Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey.
Yeah.
Um, and I was on they wanted quite a tight turnaround as it is, so they wanted it in like a couple of weeks. This was way before they'd obviously announced it. It had gone viral. Um, so I started work on that, just doing a treatment. Um, and then sometimes just with sort of distributors and things, I sort of handed it in. And they took a little bit too long to get back to me because at the time, this tends to happen with me. If I get offered one thing, then there's two or three other things that come like within a few days. So literally within 3 days, I had three different kind of job offers.
Yeah.
One of which was Pooh, and yeah, it was obviously quite an interesting concept. I'm not sure how much has changed, between what they were envisioning when I was kind of doing it to what they've got now. But uh, if people think it's extreme, well, the one that I sort of handed in that we'd gone over with the producer was sort of deemed too extreme. So it could have been worse. So
Well, well, that
yeah,
yeah, that's wild. That's wild to hear, because I do know for a fact the other one. I mean, that was one of the critiques, was that it was extreme, and I think it's more so that it catches the audience off a bit. It's a bit jarring, and then with
yeah.
the Bambi and the Peter Pan coming, I just these this world that they're creating is going to be, very interesting. And I'm kind of curious as to how you got, mixed up with that. With Is it Jagged Edge Productions? How did you start working with those guys? And what's your relationship like with them now?
So Jagged Edge, I've done. Ironically, they did a couple of collabs with a company called Champ Dog. So Scott Jeffrey, who's like a producer that people will kind of be aware of because he's done so many films. I think like 100 films in the last few years.
Yeah.
So he jumps between sort of Jagged Edge, Champ Dog, Proportion Films, and Dark Abyss Productions as well. So there's a little bit of a kind of indie horror family there, really. So I've just done two Christmas films with them.
Yeah.
Just this guy, so nice Christmas films. Um, yeah, that was probably so. My first start in features was a film that Scott produced. And this was way back in like 2018, 19, I think, which was Scarecrow's Revenge. Uh, it's not our
Familiar.
fight, yeah, not our finest hour, but it's just one of those where he was sort of just starting out. He'd only been doing it a year or two, and from then he's kind of progressed, and his films have got slowly bigger. Um, and I've done like a few films with him still each year, so like three or four I've tended to do. This year, I think what I'm doing is kind of moving slightly away from doing sort of creature features and things like that, which is the sort of things that they're doing at the moment. So I've not heard anything about their new kind of horrorverse. I think in terms of writing, which is where my kind of side would be, um, I think Scott and Reese are kind of like they're looking at now doing fewer films but slightly bigger and better. Uh, so I think they'll probably be handling the writing themselves rather than outsourcing to anyone else. Because a big part of the reason why they go to people like me is that if they want a script done in a couple of weeks, because they'll all inevitably be working on something anyway,
Yeah.
they kind of outsource. So yeah, they'll be doing fewer films, and I suppose they'll be outsourcing a little bit less.
Well, like those guys, it seems like the further I dove into your catalog, it seemed like you're constantly working as well. You mentioned, even with Pooh, you had three other projects happening at the same time. Can you talk a bit about your process and how you balance, handling so many things at one time, ultimately?
Yes, so I mean, some of them can be, really quick turnaround. So um, occasionally, if I work with Scott, so when I did a Christmas film just in November, I did one, and in January, I kind of finished one off. They tend to be, sometimes I'll get a note saying, "Oh, can you write this?" They'll give me like a treatment or an outline, and I just do the draft.
Yeah.
And it's within like 2 weeks, and then a couple of weeks after that they're shooting. So
Wow.
sometimes I like that process because it means I do it, and then I've done my part and that's it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can drag on a bit, um, and then if I have more sort of personal projects or pet projects, sometimes I'll kind of develop those over a slightly longer period of time.
With Reese and Scott, do them in particular, when you turn in a script, how do they edit it, or how much do they change, or do they give you like, just here's an outline, you run with it? Like, is that the process?
Yeah, that's the process now, really. I think they've got into a quite a good system. So they'll get a kind of idea of that a distributor wants
Yeah.
something you like, maybe a Fire Twister film, and then they'll come to me, and they've probably got a treatment at this point, and so it's almost foolproof, really. That so I go with it. I do my draft, hand it in, and then they kind of run with it, and then if they're filming within a certain, within a few weeks, maybe, uh, they'll do some edits here and there. Occasionally, they wait a bit longer, and then things come up. So maybe they have, location problems or cast changes.
Yeah.
I've had certain things where I've written maybe like two guys and a girl go get lost in the woods somewhere, and then by the time it's filming, it's four girls instead. Um, so obviously that has changes and things. Other times they can just be changes from a budgetary point of view, or just maybe sometimes there was a film I did, Jurassic Island, a year or two back. Uh, I'd kind of handed in a draft, and then it had been delayed slightly a couple of times. By the time they got to filming it, they had availability to film on a big ship.
Yeah.
So they rewrote the whole opening, and then they rewrote a few of the characters as well. So occasionally, it'll be about 50% of what's left of what I'd originally written. Sometimes a bit more.
Yeah. Is there anything that's changed that's like, you saw it and it upset you, or like annoyed you, or you're just like, whatever, it's out of my, once you turn it in, it's kind of out of your hands. But I'm just curious, as
Yeah.
from a writer's perspective, is there anything that ever pissed you off ultimately?
I think sometimes these can come from like the distributors themselves. I think sometimes they want everything quite simplified. So I remember on one of my first films, they, I think it was one of the Viking Scarecrows versus Vikings, and they'd added in a date, and it's meant to be Vikings, and they'd added in something like, I don't know, 1788
Yeah.
as like the date, and it's like, way past Viking era.
Yeah.
Of course, people pointed that out in the reviews, and it's like, no, I didn't write that.
Yeah.
I didn't put that in there. And then there's other times where characters will literally be, they say when you're writing, you should show, not tell. Um, Sometimes distributors seem like they want the simplest thing to make sure that an audience gets what's going on. But I've had things where characters are almost commentating on what they're doing whilst they're doing it.
Mhm.
So that's been added in on a couple of things, and I think, oh no.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it doesn't bother me too much.
Yeah, I could see, especially those particular changes, I could see how the date would be extremely frustrating,
Yeah,
especially when you are reading the reviews and they're like, they're critiquing you ultimately.
yeah,
um you know I've heard of writers, visiting the script, but on indie films, is that typically the case? Do you visit the set a lot, or like are you on set for any of these productions, or do you just turn it in and you're good to go, moving on to the next one?
Yeah, so I pretty much just turn them in.
Yeah,
I don't think there's really a big need, certainly not at this budget level, to do that. Um, I think the problem is, I know a lot of films will have last minute changes and they'll have changes on set. I mean, a lot of these films are no different, but because they're so conscious of time and how much, everything costs,
yeah,
a lot of these films will be shot in sort of 7, 8 days. So there's really no room for error. So they're not going to be wanting as much as possible, unless there's something disastrous, to be doing last minute writing on set. Um, I did have one with a film called Return of the Tooth Fairy where a makeup artist didn't show up in the morning. And there was meant to be these 3 deaths that were quite elaborate, taking place in 3 different places. But they literally just had to condense it down and have this mythical tooth fairy find a gun and shoot 3 people at the same time. So there's just literally no way around it, because you can't really, because there's such a tight budget and I guess tight profit margin, you can't really go back and do reshoots in 2 or 3 weeks.
yeah.
Just know, because if you do that and hire the location, you're cutting into the profit margin. So yeah, it's almost like hand the script in, a week beforehand, maybe up to the last point. Once it's locked in, that's it, and they don't really want any changes
Yeah.
unless they absolutely have to.
And then
Um,
and then just roll with the punches ultimately, if
that's
the
it. Yeah,
yeah, if
make
the
the
makeup
best of
artist
it.
doesn't show up. That is wild. Okay, wow. You mentioned Fire Twister, and fortunately, I just watched Firenado recently. I
Yeah,
picked it up at my local Walmart, and I was kind of curious as to where that idea came from. There's this tornado, there's armed robbers. You mentioned that they can the distributors give you ideas, or they give them to Reese and Scott, and then they get to you. But I thought that script in particular, of what I've seen of your work, it seemed very like there was a lot going on. So I was kind of curious as to like how much of that was from you.
that one in particular. So we had an idea. They wanted, obviously, a fire twister movie,
Yeah,
um, because disaster movies seem to do quite well. There's a quite big market for them. Um, we obviously, we had to balance out how much you would see of the twister, with whatever the subplot would be. So that ended up being kind of like a heist, the
yeah,
heist idea, which we kind of spitballed a little bit and then came up with that idea as the subplot, because we needed something else to fill the time when obviously the fire twister isn't there.
yeah.
Um, you can only get so much fire twisters on this budget level. So yeah, I think that was quite a fun one to write, because a lot of these distributors generally, they're not big into humor in film, so we could treat this one a little bit tongue in cheek. I think there's a line in there about him, let's activate the hyperdrive or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So we had a little bit of license to have, a little bit more tongue in cheek, just so you roll with the kind of the ridiculousness of it.
Well, I've noticed that it seems to be pretty popular over here. Like I know that, obviously Fire Twister films do well. They kind of meet their uh quota per se. But for some reason that particular film is constantly sold out at my local stores. I see people talking about it online quite a bit. I was kind of curious as if there is any word on a Fire NATO 2, or revisiting that world.
I actually turned that down a couple of weeks ago,
Oh
so
wow.
it is, yeah, it's on the way. So I don't know who's going to be taking care of it, but I thought, I kind of love all different types of movies, and sometimes it's a case of they'll offer me something.
Yeah.
Most of the time they're kind of crazy ideas, but if I've done it once, I'm not, I kind of feel like, I've done a fire twister film now, so it's not worth me doing it just for the money, because it's not that much. But yeah, I think, I've crossed that off. I've
Cool.
done Mega Lightning as well.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so whoever's going to take it over, I hope they have fun with it. I think, it was fun to write. So I'm interested to see what they come up with, concept wise, and what they kind of have as the side plot.
Yeah. I'm curious as well, man, because I like what is like when something like that happens and someone basically takes your reins, do you watch the sequel or you're just like, oh, it exists? Like I'm like, how do you feel about that ultimately as a writer?
I'm not too bothered really. I've actually taken on some sequels myself. So I did two Tooth Fairy films,
Yeah.
and yeah, my first one was a sequel. My Leprechaun film was a sequel as well. So I've kind of taken off on other people's stuff, and then I've had things where they've taken over mine. So I wrote Jack and Jill, uh, not the Sandler film. Yeah, The Legend of Jack and Jill, and they've had a sequel to that.
Yep.
I've not got around to watching that, but I wouldn't be against watching them. It's just at the moment I've got very little time to just sort of sit down and watch too many things,
Of course.
unfortunately.
Of course, yeah. Another one I wanted to talk about was the Area 51 incident. As the guy that wrote the film, how do you think? Did you have a chance to watch that one? And if so, how do you think that one turned out?
That one, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So that one, it probably had quite a few changes from what I wrote, because I think what they've done is they had a slightly bigger budget than usual,
Yeah,
and I think the same with Fire Twister. So they kind of look, a level or two above some of the other things. So uh, just in terms of locations, they had to change a couple of things from my draft, and then that kind of influenced kind of changing certain things throughout the film. But no, I really enjoyed that one. I
yeah.
thought they kept a good pace to it, and the effects were pretty good for that for that budget level anyway.
I couldn't agree more. I actually found myself looking up the budget when it was over. I was like, wow, that was really good for what they had, and I was extremely impressed. Uh, Oddly enough, I watched that one with my whole family, and we were all entertained throughout the entire film. My wife did point out, however, that one of the scientists was wearing extremely like high heels that she probably wouldn't have be wearing if she was a scientist,
Yeah,
but and that happens, but and that's the thing that a woman will notice, but I'm more
yeah.
worried about the monsters. um for viewers that are discovering you through your recent work, and these bigger budget films like Area 51 and Fire Tornado, you know where and even this interview, because I'm sure that there's people that are going to be watching this that aren't familiar, with your work. Where do you want to point them to? You have a huge catalog, a ton of fun films under your belt. What should they watch first, man?
I would say probably When Darkness Falls. So that's in the US at the moment. So that's probably just for US viewers.
Gotcha.
So it's on all the sort of things like Tubi, Amazon. I think there's one of the YouTube channels is playing it at the moment. So yeah, I'd say that one, and Renegades,
Renegades, yeah.
which is starring Danny Trejo, Lee Majors. Yeah, and then Firenado and Area 51. Those are probably the four that are probably, I would say, the highest quality. Um, there's another one which I do really like. It's Amityville Witches,
Yeah.
which I really enjoyed writing. Um, I don't think people quite got it. I think they were expecting something a bit darker, but it's a bit more sort of it's almost a bit more Sabrina the Teenage Witch than anything like The Conjuring or something like that. So, you know, I quite enjoyed that one because it was quite campy and a bit silly, but I think people were expecting something a bit darker.
Yeah.
I think that's an issue with horror fans, that they're quite possessive over their particular kind of subgenre that they like, and if it doesn't kind of deliver that, uh, then they'll let you know about it. So,
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, jumping back to Renegades, I'm actually calling in from Houston, Texas, home of Lee Majors. How big for you is that when a big name like Danny Trejo, Lee Majors, like when those names are attached to something that you put, pen to paper, blood, sweat, and tears, you know, how does that make you feel, man? Like that has to feel good.
It is really good because I mean, like first and foremost, I'm still a big film fan.
Yeah.
Um, and then in terms of renegades, Danny Trejo, Michael Pare, Lee Majors, Nick Moran, all these guys I kind of grew up watching. Louis Mandylor as well, who's really good in the film.
Yeah.
I still remember him back in the day from. Do you remember Martial Law, the Sammo Hung action series?
Yeah, of course, man. All of those names, they have so much like it's to have one in a film is big. To have the like just that ensemble cast in something that you penned is that has to be so wild, man.
It definitely is, and I think with that one in particular, it wasn't a case of I was writing and I didn't know who was going to be in it. I kind of got advance notice of who I was writing for, so there's kind of a benefit there that being a fan of someone like Danny Trejo, I kind of like I know how to write to his strengths and make him make the best use out of him.
Yeah.
And the same with the other guys as well. But that's just for me as a fan, it's great to see.
Excellent, man. Yeah, and then I also know, or on IMDb at least, it's listed you have 11 projects in production. I'm honestly sure there's more that probably aren't even listed.
Yeah.
Is there anything particular that you're excited to see come to life, or is there anything that you want to mention for fans to be looking forward to?
Yeah, so I mean, right now I've got the baby in the basket, so this is a bit more of a pet project for me. I'm co-producing with Nathan Shepka. We did When Darkness Falls together,
Yeah.
set in Scotland. So this is a bit of a sort of gothic horror film. We're crowdfunding that at the moment, actually. So we're hoping to get the money raised for that in the next kind of month or so, and then shoot in the autumn. But yeah, we're really excited about that one. And I think I'm sort of generally starting to do a bit of a shift into producing my own stuff now as well.
Awesome, man. Is there anything like that you're particularly excited about producing, or is it too early to talk about?
So yeah, that one I'm very excited about producing.
Yeah.
And then I've got two or three other things in the works
Cool, man.
just as a producer. I've still got a few commissions and that, so I've done two films now with Mark Lester, director of Commando.
Yep.
So they've literally just shot one of those, which is well, it's all over social media anyway, but it's a Cinderella horror film
Yeah. Yeah.
with Natasha Henstridge in, which is another one that's kind of like, I grew up watching her in Species and Maximum Risk, so I was a big fan, quite pleased with that bit of casting. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And then I'm working on a second one with him at the moment, which I can't really mention too much. But it's another kind of existing IP, so it'll be another sort of in the vein of Bambi and stuff like that, where they're taking existing IPs and then making horror adaptations.
Yeah. Turning it upside down.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to mention, you used to write for Ain't It Cool News, and you contribute to Flickering Myth still. Can you talk a bit about uh what else you do, and like outside of doing these crazy films, and like how, like what kind of things you contribute, because I know you are a film fan at heart. How did you transition from writing to ultimately writing film like that? I think that's it's a huge step, but it seems like a very natural step as well.
Yeah, I think I've just been interested in film since I was a kid. So
Yeah.
just wandering around video shops and looking at all the cover art, it just came from there really. So when I started reviewing films, it was just literally IMDb, reviewing films on there. Then it kind of transitioned to thinking, well, maybe I can submit to a few sites here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of reviews on Ain't It Cool like way back, and then I think it was 2010 that I started on Flickering Myth, and I still write there now.
Yeah.
And they give me carte blanche, so I can write about pretty much anything I want. And I have quite eclectic taste. So one week it'll be, something maybe a bit art housey, then it'll be, B-movie horrors. I just jump around writing about, these different things, and it just they seem to pick up a good audience as well. So there's a good platform there. I'd always been interested in terms of making films. I used to run around in the woods with my brother, with a video camera making films. Then probably because I was interested in writing, it naturally came to me that the writing side of it would be my main interest.
Yeah.
So I started off with, producing short films, and then that transitioned into feature films. And I've kind of missed producing myself. So I've kind of gone through this massive, raft of commissions, on creature features and action films. And I'm sort of arcing back to producing myself a bit more, because I like, having a bit more control over the end product and, what I'm making as well.
Well, awesome, man. Yeah, congratulations. That'll be awesome, full circle. Before I let you go, man, is there anything you want to mention, maybe where people can follow you, your social medias, anything? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Joliffe Productions, and that's probably the main place that I sort of hang around in. I'm on Facebook as well. People can find me there. Also on Flickering Myths, so I have an author's page there. Yeah, so probably just those three. I'm not massively keen on social media, but I do those three. So yeah.
Well, excellent. Excellent, man. Thank you so much for your time. Here at CineDump, we let the doers know how they're doing. And Tom, you are doing just fine. You keep making them, you keep writing them, you keep producing them, and we will keep watching them, man. I really do appreciate your time. It was a pleasure getting to know you, and I look forward to see what comes next. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks a lot, mate. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man.